Thank you for tuning in to episode number 20 of this podcast series, which actually is the final one in this series. All of it came from things that I got insight into when I was in the hospital for 23 days and almost died. And the last one that we're doing builds on the one that I did before about God's love of variety. And then I applied that to the human race and the varieties within human beings as far as their skin color and everything else involved in that variety. So I've entitled this particular episode as Stop Black Tax. And I'll explain that as we go. So after the last lesson and talking about the great variety and the human race and all of that, where do we go from here, knowing God's love for variety, even in humans, and the fallacy of race as most people think of it? There is no such thing as race scientifically. Well, here's what I would answer. We who are white must get educated and start acting upon what we are learning. Here are two verses that are very important. In the family of God, the church. He says in Galatians 6:2, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. And then in Romans 12:15, he says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. That's a way of carrying those burdens. You can't carry burdens. You can't mourn with someone without knowing what they are facing and feeling. And so we've got to learn a lot more about our brothers and sisters of color if we are going to really be the family that God intends. You know, when I was in the hospital and people thought I was going to die, they wanted to ask questions, right? They wanted to ask Teresa and Brian and Joy and my grandsons and whomever else, how are you feeling? How are you holding up? How are you facing this? What are you feeling, knowing that you might die? I mean, I got a lot of interesting questions afterwards, mainly on that one. But at any rate, we ask questions because we're concerned. We want to know, what are you feeling? What's it like to almost die? And then I think of some people in our church, two families that had a house burned down. One of them had to get another house entirely. And then one had severe damage done. It took a year to get it back to normal. And so guess what? Everyone wants to know, well, how are you feeling? How did it feel watching your house burn? How are you doing now? What can we do to help? All of those kinds of questions. And then when someone dies, one of our close friends just had his mother die a few days ago. And so, it's going to be natural to ask, how are you feeling about that? What is it like? What can we do to help? We ask questions because we want to know the world in which someone is living. What is the grief world like? What is a calamity world like financially? What is a near-death experience like? What can we do to help? And so we want to know about those kinds of burdens and griefs and many, many more like them. Why do we not want to know about what brothers and sisters of color are facing? That's the question. I started a blog back in 2016 entitled Black Tax and White Benefits. Let me tell you how that started. Here in Dallas, Texas, July the 7th, 2016, there was a protest march after two black men had been killed by white policemen, one in Minnesota and one in Louisiana. There was a protest march going on, and during that protest march, Micah Xavier Johnson opened fire on police officers, killed 5 outright, white police officers, wounded 9, and also wounded 2 civilians during that terrible calamity. 10 days later, I spoke on the subject of race. Mark Mancini, one of our evangelists here in the Dallas church, was leading the Southwest, still is, the Southwest region of our church. And at that time, it was half white and half non-white, 40% black, 10% Asian and Hispanic. The staff was equally mixed, about half and half. And so Mark asked me to come over and do a lesson dealing with racial issues because it was such a very tense time. And with a very diverse group like Mark had, obviously a very tense time, and there have been many since then. But I started a blog at that point. I preached the sermon. I preached it in other parts of Dallas. Other people heard about it, listened to it online, and had me come. And so I went to other places and spoke, Philadelphia, St. Louis, New Jersey, other places, and spoke on the subject of race. But I started that blog and I called it Black Tax and White Benefits. I started off calling it Black Tax and White Privilege. But my friend Michael Burns, who writes a lot on the subject and is much better at it than I am, he said that is a politically loaded word. I'd recommend you not use that as the title. I did write one of the articles on the blog entitled simply White Privilege. It's politically loaded, but stop and think about it. I've tried to define it for people because people immediately start having reactions to that. We've been conditioned to do that by our political world, and they're doing it for a different reason than to help anyone. They're doing it for political reasons, in my judgment. But at any rate, here's a quote from that article with the title White Privilege. Here's the quote. White privilege is not so much what you have, it is what you don't have. Stereotypical treatment of the worst kind, if you're white. A fairly recent segment of Dr. Phil was devoted to showing what white privilege is. He is quite in tune with the topic, as were all of his panelists. As Michael Burns puts it, white privilege does not mean that you did not have obstacles and challenges in life. It means that your skin color or culture wasn't one of them. That's the bottom line issue. Now, since I started that blog, I've done a lot of speaking on the subject, as I said, and I've written quite a few blog articles. I've also had other people like Michael Burns write articles and others because I've been trying to help people. I've said I've got two purposes with this particular blog. I can't change the world. The world is a world, and as I said in the last episode, haters gonna hate. That's just human beings without God as their father and guide. But what I'm trying to accomplish is to educate my white brothers and sisters in the church to be aware of the world that our brothers and sisters of color live in, and to help bear their burdens and to help them with the grief that they face because of the calamities that come into their lives. This business of white policemen killing black people, from the time that I wrote about it, it's gotten probably worse. It's certainly become more of a public awareness since that particular time. So I say also, besides educating my white brothers and sisters, I want to help my brothers and sisters of color, particularly African Americans, to be able to handle the world that they are in with its challenges in a spiritual way. And so no matter what's going on in the world, we still are going to have to follow the Bible and react to things in a spiritual way, and that is not easy. But I have made it my practice to talk to black people all the time. I do it everywhere. I mean, in the church, out of the church, I strike up conversations. I ask them, what have your experiences been? Sometimes I'll just cut to the chase and say, how many times have you been stopped by a policeman for DWB, driving while black? And there are a lot of people that give me some pretty shocking answers to that question. but I talk to people all of the time. Just recently, we have a black song leader. He's actually the head of our music ministry in our church, and his name is Stan Hollowell. And so I said, Stan, let's get together. I'd like to pick your brain some on this whole racial issue, because I know you're very aware of some things. You and I have talked some before, but here are some questions. And I gave him these questions. I said, think about them in advance so we can talk about them when we get together. Here are the questions. As a black person, what would you like your white friends to know about what hurts you? Please break down these into deep hurts and those less hurtful but still painful. Maybe number them by depth of pain, starting with the worst to you personally. Number 2, by prioritizing again, what things would you most like to see change in your white disciple friends? Break this one down into their attitudes and their actions. And then I put number 3, a reminder. These are WPQs, white person questions. Is there a better way to come at this from a black person's perspective? And then 4th, what do I, Gordon, do that does or could hit a black person the wrong way? Since I'm trying to learn, black people appreciate that and likely cut me some slack. They probably lay off and let me get by with some things that they wish I wouldn't say. And so for that reason, I said, I don't want slack. I don't want a free pass. Even though you know I'm on your side of trying to educate and help people of all colors, I don't want a free pass. I want to hear the truth. And so Stan and I had a Zoom call, as it turned out, but he was very frank. I don't know that he answered questions 1, 2, and 3 in that order, but he definitely talked about the things that were in his heart because he felt like I was a safe place and I was sincere about wanting to learn and wanting to change. At church last week, I talked to a black sister and told her about talking to Stan, and said, how about me talking with you and your husband? She said, my husband would definitely jump all over that, and I'll be happy to be there too, but I can tell that's going to be a very animated discussion because black people have a lot of things on their heart from their experiences, but they don't often talk to white people about it. They don't know how white people are going to respond. White people sometimes are very defensive. They can be. White fragility is a word that a lot of white people shudder at. But by shuddering, they show how true it actually is. If something makes you shudder or you want to just avoid it, that means that here is a subject you actually need to delve into, because if you're in a church like the one I am in, I've got a lot of people of color who are my friends, and I want them to feel free to talk with me. And so I don't think we white people can claim innocence through ignorance any longer. It's all right out there all the time. I think we need to get educated. I think we need to care enough to learn, to talk with people that are different than us, to love them, not in generalities, but in specifics. I think it's time to stop this black tax thing. On that title, by the way, I did not explain black tax. I got it from a movie, and the woman in the movie said this, and I've heard it from a number of black people. She said in the movie that if you're black, you have to do twice the job that a white person does to get the same recognition. And black people nod knowingly when I define it that way. I was talking to my neighbor very recently. She's a retired black woman, lives across the street from me. We've had a number of conversations, but she said also the term black tax refers to the idea that black people, because they're going to be stereotyped everywhere they go when they're around white people, because they know they're being stereotyped by white people in general. She said that the stress that comes from that is called by many black people black tax. And I've talked to black doctors. I've talked to them about the stresses and why the statistics show that if you're black, you have a different blood pressure issue, a different heart disease issue. It's all increased because you live with the knowledge that a lot of white people are looking at you and they have certain attitudes about you. They don't look at you just as an individual unless they know you. They stereotype you by race. That's not so with white people, but that is true of any minority group. And so black tax refers both to the concept of living under the stress of being a minority in a white-dominated society, and it's also used to say that black people often feel like, and it's reality, that they have to do twice the job a white person does to be recognized the same. And so those are some ideas. We're going to have a discussion with two dear friends of mine from church that we'll talk further about this. But if this particular episode, the final one about God's love of variety, part 2 in essence, if this has disturbed you in any way as a white person or as a black person, then you've got some work to do. If you're white, you need to learn. You need to learn how to love and bear burdens of your brothers and sisters who are a different color than you. And if you're a black person disturbed by it, then you need to keep working on handling it God's way and imitating Jesus and how he handled mistreatment, because you're going to receive some and you know that, but we've still got to be spiritual no matter what our skin color is. We're one race, we're the human race, we're made in God's image, we're all more precious to God than we can imagine. We need to stamp out black tax and love one another as God loves us all. God bless you. Let's work on it. Okay, again, this to me is the fun part of this presentation, which is the last one in the series. And we have back with us for this session, Chris and Michelle Carter. They were with us for the last one. This one is a continuation. So you already know something about them. If you haven't seen 19, go back and watch episode 19 before this one. You get to meet them that way. But this time I'm going to ask you questions. And I would like for you, from a black person's perspective in the church, the world is broken badly. But I want to talk about in the church, in the family of God. I want you guys to tell me the things that get to you in a bad way. And we'll ultimately talk about the things that you would like to see changed. And I had those in the presentation. I had the questions that I talked to Stan Hollowell about recently, just wanting to know more about your perspective, but also I asked him about me and what do I say that catches people wrong. And Michelle and I have talked about that some, one certain subject that she and I talked about. So those are kind of the two areas I want you to talk about. What hurts you and what would you like to see change in the church on the racial front?
Want me to go first again? Sure. Okay, I'll go first. I think we talked about this in the last episode, but I'll just slightly change this because I think that, and Gordon even coached me through part of this when I wrote the paper,
right?
The white paper. But going back to the topic of Jesus's racial background, right. And even though I completely agree with you scientifically, we adapt it to our environments. It still hurts me in the church. It hurts me in the church when we change Jesus. Mm-hmm. We change his appearance, whether that be any majority culture. Okay. So I've seen this inside the black church in America, where they make Jesus black. I've seen it, even in Hispanic countries where they'll make Jesus Hispanic. And, certainly in America, for the most part, they make Jesus white. And so, that still kind of hurts me. I just want Jesus to be, well, actually, let me even just catch what I just said, because that's the essence of it. We want Jesus to be fill in the blank instead of Jesus was objectively,
Right.
Hebrew, at that time, that nation's more closely related to Arab world or Middle Eastern world.
Absolutely.
And that's what it was. Just let the fact be fact.
Right.
Even today.
Right.
And there's lots of reasons why things change, but if I'm sharing about what hurts me, if I'm watching a sermon or a presentation, and we have white Abraham, white Moses, white King David, pretty much all the characters of the Old Testament, white. Even in my mind, they're white.
Right.
Even though, historically speaking, probably not super accurate.
Right.
That still starts to take a bone with me. And not even because I'm a black person. Not even because I'm a black person. Certainly, I think part of it because I recognize differences and I'm okay with it. But I also think that it hits me more from the biblical insensitivity to the Bible, or I guess it almost hits me the same as false doctrine hits me.
Right.
Because it's a falsity.
Okay.
And I view it being a falsehood. So especially when I hear someone preaching from the pulpit and then they mix it with a false image.
Right.
Now, most likely their hearts aren't trying to do that. I don't think people are purposely trying to push white supremacy or anything by doing that. But it makes me cringe.
Yeah.
And it bothers me more from hey, you're mixing things here. And sure, I've done it. I mean, we all make mistakes with things we say. That's okay. I just think it's more the systematic buy-in to Western culture that defines Western Christianity.
Right.
That if I go and even if I talk to people in the Mediterranean world and I ask them the same question, they would quickly be completely opposite. Not even local, just they're coming from more of a historical perspective. Oh, he was Israeli. Yeah. That's how they would say it. And they would be reflecting it to a Mediterranean country or, a Middle Eastern kind of view. But I think in the West especially, we have allowed, do I dare say we've allowed, let me just say this to be safer, we've allowed a Western culture and Western principles, Western beliefs to seep into our definition of Christianity. Yeah. And that bothers me deeply. Yeah, so you're not bothered just as a black person, you're bothered as a Bible student. Yeah. So both of those. Did we run that paper of yours on my blog? I think we did. Yeah, so those of you watching, Chris wrote a paper about Jesus' color, and I've got maybe 2 articles on there about that because I think it does matter. And so Black Tax and White Benefits is the name of the blog. And so I think Chris has an article on there on the subject. Michelle?
First of all, one thing that I love about our church is its growing sensitivity to the need for diversity in our church. I mean, I remember just how we push past our uncomfortability to reach out to someone who's not like ourselves.
Right.
And that's how our church has become as diverse as it has.
Right.
And how we have a mission mindset to not just help people here, but abroad in other countries. And that's one of the things I love about our church, because when you come to church, whether small or large, you look around and you see what God has done through us really trying to grow and learn on this topic of loving people beyond the color of their skin. But there still are challenges, and I think some of that seeps in because we come from the world.
Right.
And we're bringing our biases into it.
Right.
And so we experience it. I've experienced it throughout my years being a part of a very diverse group. And thankfully, God has equipped me through the scriptures on how to deal with that, frankly and honestly, with my sister or my brother. But it has hurt, and, and it's actually not even just from white people. So I don't even want to say it was from a white person only, because I've been hurt racially by white people and Latino people and and African people, so I don't like to say it's just a white-black issue. It's an issue of understanding, and it's an issue that we come up against friction when there's people from different backgrounds that come together. So I think how I've dealt with it is when it's been spoken to me, I usually think, okay, they don't understand. And they're not knowledgeable about something, or they're ignorant about something. And the reason why I'm able to do that is because I'm actually half of one culture and half of another culture. So I've experienced it on both sides. When I go to Japan, I experience it. When I'm among people of my own culture in Black America, I experience it. And I experience the ignorance on both sides. So in church, when I experience it, it just reminds me, okay, there's ignorance here. How can I talk to them in a Christ-like way, share my heart, be open, and draw us together rather than, pull my heart back.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you guys are definitely a lot more skilled in negotiating that kind of thing. If we had a Black person here that was a new convert to Christianity and had been raised in the Black culture, they would have a lot more difficulty navigating the differences than you do. But I'm sure, going back to you, Chris, I'm sure there was a time in your life when you probably didn't know how to negotiate or even want to negotiate before you're a Christian. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So my main purpose in this lesson and the one before is to help white people try to figure out more about the things that you do feel, the things that do hurt you, etc. So I'm trying to educate and motivate people to learn more. There are a lot of good books. If I could get everyone to read Michael's Burns books, if I could get them to read Crossing the Line and All Things to All People and Escaping the Beast, if I could get them to read those 3 books, I'd be very delighted, because they would learn a lot that they don't know. But I want to know what you feel, because number one, I don't want to hurt you personally. I don't want to say something to you that would be offensive to you on the racial front. But on the other hand, I want to know what you're feeling, because I love you. And, you're my brother and sister in Christ, and I love you. And I want to know, okay, what are the things that hurt you? Because I want to help with that.
I think for me, in the church, what's very important, since I was a young child, is to see representation in leadership. I was inspired by women that looked like myself, who were on staff, making an amazing difference for God. For me, before I became a Christian, all I wanted to do is to be a doctor, because I was inspired by seeing women of color, or Bill Cosby, who was a doctor, and then when I became a Christian, my passion became to change the world for God. And then to be able to see people like myself in leadership, moving and shaking and being passionate, that's important. It does everything for someone spiritually, as far as their vision and what they want to do for God. I think seeing people on, serving and on the stage, it is important for young people especially to see themselves up there speaking, preaching, singing, serving, leading, using their gifts for God. And so when that's not done, or if there's not a sensitivity to that, that could be detrimental or hurtful. Or when there's not or when there's not an expressed, I guess, purpose in looking for diversity and saying, hey, God has given all of us talent. So if everyone up here looks the same, there's maybe something that we need to do. We need to start looking for the gifts amongst our people. So that's one example, I would say, in the church that could be hurtful if it's not considered.
Okay, good. Agreed. Totally. It's not like we don't have a lot of Black people or people of color in general that don't have a lot of ability and stuff.
And not just in supportive roles.
Exactly.
Like they could be the lead evangelist in a congregation that's white.
Totally.
Because if a white evangelist can lead an entire Black congregation, why can't a Black person lead an entire congregation of white people?
Yeah.
So not just supportive roles, but the lead roles. I was recently asked to write in a book that was written 30 years ago by a group of women in our church. And all the authors were pretty much white, except for maybe one Latino woman and one Asian woman.
Yeah.
And so I was asked to comment and be a supporting author to this. But my suggestion was, instead of keeping the same original authors, why don't you replace those authors with some women of color? Instead of having people like myself, who are people of color, as the responder, why aren't we the ones who are writing the chapter?
Yeah.
And so just small things like that. That's something that I'm sensitive to, where we're not just the ones receiving and listening, but we're also the ones giving our God-given gifts to the next generation.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to have this group of crazy guys, Black guys. I was voted to be Black on Monday nights for football. But I would joke with these guys and say, okay, next week should we invite a token white? You know, you're basically saying you don't want to be a token Black.
Yeah.
And
that's what I'm saying.
That is what you're saying. I got it. And I'm glad you said it, because sometimes we think in terms of placating people or making them not feel bad, and so we'll do this or do that. We think in those terms rather than who can do the best job. And are we using all kinds of people so that you can identify with it? I mean, I've been in situations and had young guys speak. They probably weren't as good as me on a technical basis, but the young people heard them better than they heard me. And I knew it. And Black people or Latino people or whatever need to see people they can identify with on a leadership level, leading and doing and serving that way. Anything else you want to add here, Doc? We try to hold these down to a certain time, but this topic is so important, I could go all night on it.
Sure, I'll share another comment briefly. I think piggybacking on the token thought, but I think whenever you have or at least in the church, let me just keep it to that. It's something I like to see change in the church is when you have a diverse group of people, but there's a majority culture, right? Whether it be white, Mexican, Black, depending on where you are, right? Asian. Sometimes what's so interesting about this, I've been in different types of churches where I've been in a church where it's majority Asian. I've been in a church where it's majority Mexican, living down close to the border regions. And I've been in many churches that are majority white, right?
Right.
And majority Black churches as well. What's interesting is that the only time I've experienced this in our churches where there's a majority culture who expects others to be like them is with the churches that are majority white.
Yeah.
The churches that are majority Black, they don't expect you to be Black. They don't necessarily expect you to you have to like hip hop or
Yeah.
Black culture things. They're like, come as you are. And they're
Right.
very much so freely saying, come as you are.
Okay.
Same thing when I was in a church that was majority Mexican,
Right.
was come as you are. You don't have to be Mexican. You don't have to know Spanish. It's okay, you know, or like a rapist,
Mhm.
right? But I have been part of multiple majority white churches where what they like, what they do, they expect you to conform,
Yeah.
right? And I think that that's most likely because, well, at least in America, the melting pot, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
People who immigrated here, even though everyone did, people who immigrated here that are part of minority groups, they learned to become more chameleons.
Mm-hmm.
And where the majority never learned to become chameleon in anything.
Yeah.
Because they were forcefully saying, no, this is just
Right.
going to be the way it is.
Yeah.
And so I think that if there's anything that there are any Caucasian brothers and sisters listening to this, just to consider, you will help anybody feel great if you just don't expect them to conform to what you think.
Yeah.
Or what you think is tasty, or what you think type of music is good,
Mm-hmm.
or you think what type of clothes you should wear.
Mm-hmm.
These things are very subtle things, but there's still this conformity, especially in the church. It's sensitive, in my opinion, because the only thing we're called to be, conform to, is Christ.
Right.
We're not called to conform to any human culture, actually.
Right.
But we are expected to conform to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And the same would go for politics. We're not expected to conform to a party.
Right.
Or a presidential leader.
Right.
Now we're expected to submit and respect the authorities that God's put in place, but
And pray for them.
And pray for them. But we are not, and I repeat, we are not, by God's standard, to conform to the world.
Amen.
Instead, we are expected to conform to the image of Christ
Mm-hmm.
and what He laid down for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if we focus more on that holistically, it would help us maybe not even subtly do that. And I think that's done. I don't think people's hearts are in the wrong place again, like I said
Mhm.
earlier. I think it's just done because of comfort.
Mm-hmm.
But comfort's one of those sneaky things.
Right.
You know, comfort's super sneaky. No one sees it. It's very smooth.
Mm-hmm.
But yet it's that seeking of comfort that makes others uncomfortable.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
not only the seeking of comfort, it's the avoidance of uncomfortability.
It's true.
And America has historically been a white culture, and so we expect everyone that comes into whatever group to conform to it. And so while we can say we have a diverse church in membership, the question I've been asking is, do we have a diverse church in our worship approach? Do we have a diverse church in our relationship approach?
Mm-hmm.
Are your friends mainly your color? Those are the kind of questions that I've been asking, because I think we still have, there's no question we still have a white dominant culture in America. I think we have a white dominant culture in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And so we expect people to conform. So I don't like this kind of music, so whatever. On the other hand, it's encouraging, because I asked Todd Assad one time after Stan, and the whole stage was full of a lot of gospel music that would have fit into a black church in Chicago, I asked Todd, did you get much kickback on this when you started having these kind of, music services and all that? And he said not that he could remember. So that was good. But I have heard people say, well, I just don't like that kind of music. Well, it's not just about you.
Mm-hmm.
And I have my preferences, but you'll never hear them, because I want it to be attractive to everyone. I want us to have all kinds of music. And so it thrills me when we have music going on that would fit right into another culture.
Yeah.
I love that,
yeah.
because I know that's meeting needs that my preferences wouldn't meet. Mm-hmm. And if we count others better than self, Philippians 2, then we can't just worry about what we like about church. Mm-hmm. We have to think, okay, what is going to meet the needs of the most people, period. That's the only issue. And please God, obviously please God, but God wants us to be a family. And so that means diversity in practice. So that one right there, that's a big one. Thank you for pointing that out, because our white members, for the most part, unless it's pointed out, they never even think of that. And that's my whole thing. I'm trying to point stuff out and get people to point stuff out to help me and everyone else learn. How can I make you more comfortable, but how can your needs be met? And if that means a little uncomfortability for me, sign me up. Carrying a cross and following Jesus daily, there's some uncomfortability to carrying a cross, as I understand it. So anyway, great stuff. Great to have you guys. I think you're awesome. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
So we're done here for 20 sessions. Thank you all for watching. Maybe we'll have something else come along later, but for right now, at age 80, I'm signing off of this 20-part series. God bless you.